The conference room on the 41st floor smelled like fresh espresso. And something else. Ambition, maybe, or the particular anxiety of men who had never once doubted they belonged in a room. 8 candidates sat around a brushed steel table. Their suits were tailored. Their credentials were laminated in heavy cardstock folders, each one placed at an exact right angle. The man at the far end of the table did not have a folder. He had a paper cup of water and a blue pen with the cap chewed off. His name was Daniel Voss. He was wearing dark trousers that needed pressing and a shirt that was clean, but had been ironed by someone who did not iron shirts for a living. The recruiter, a woman named Halcott, was mid-sentence when Daniel looked up and said quietly 3 words. "The east stairwell." Halcott stopped. "It's been propped open for 11 minutes, Daniel said. "Since we sat down." No one had noticed. No one moved, and for a moment the room held its breath. Vantara Group was not the kind of company that made anything. It managed the companies that made things, a holding group with controlling stakes in 4 mid-sized logistics firms, 2 pharmaceutical distributors, and a data architecture company that had recently been valued at $600 million by people who understood very little about data architecture. Its CEO was a man named Richard Falk, 53 years old, silver-haired and unhurried in the way that only certain kinds of wealth produced. He had built Vantara over 20 years from a regional consulting firm into something that appeared on the covers of 2 business magazines per year, reliably, without ever generating news that might frighten an investor. He was not a villain. He was something more complicated, a man who had learned to trust only the people he had chosen, and to choose only the people who confirmed what he already believed. Falk did not run security operations himself. That was the domain of his chief risk officer, a man named Brett Arnault, former military, former federal contractor. And now the kind of man who referred to security ecosystems in PowerPoint presentations and billed Vantara $400,000 a year for the privilege. Arnault had built a team, good people on paper. But there had been a breach the previous March. Not a dramatic one, not a ransomware event or a data dump, but a physical breach, a physical one. An unauthorized individual had accessed a server room on the 23rd floor and left nothing behind but a single smudge on a card reader that did not belong to any registered employee. That smudge had never been explained. Falk had authorized an external tryout, 8 candidates, drawn from consulting firms, private security companies, and 1 referral through a law firm he trusted. The day would involve a live scenario assessment of the Vantara building. The best candidate would be offered a senior threat assessment contract. Daniel Voss had not applied. He had been referred, reluctantly, by a retired federal agent named Ortega, who owed him something he never spoke about publicly and repaid the debt with a phone call. Daniel lived in a rented house in Garfield Park, a 3-bedroom with a furnace that clicked every winter morning. His daughter was 6 years old. Her name was Mara. She slept with a stuffed elephant named Humphrey, who had lost 1 button eye, and now wore a hand-sewn felt patch that Daniel had made in the kitchen at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, because Mara had cried for 40 minutes and he could not fix the things that mattered most, but he could fix this. Her mother, Claire, had died 22 months earlier, an aneurysm. She had been 31 years old and had laughed at bad jokes, and made very good soup, and had believed, with a sincerity Daniel found both beautiful and painful to remember, that most people were doing their best. Daniel's most recent employment had been as a shift supervisor at a private parking facility. Before that, a decade that was not on any resume he had ever submitted, and which he did not discuss in rooms with brushed steel tables. The assessment protocol was simple in the way that all well-designed traps are simple. Each candidate was given a floor plan of the building, a radio set to a shared frequency, and 2 hours to identify and document as many security vulnerabilities as possible. They would be scored on the depth, accuracy, and prioritization of their findings. 7 of the 8 candidates moved immediately. They fanned out in small formations, 2 working in pairs, others walking with the quiet efficiency of people who wanted to be seen being efficient. They held clipboards, they murmured into radios. Daniel sat in the lobby for 4 minutes and did nothing. He watched the front desk, The guard there, a heavyset man in his 50s, named according to his badge. Kaminsky was processing a visitor badge with his left hand, while his right hand rested on his thigh. 4 inches from a panic button that had been installed in 2019, according to the small adhesive label on its underside, which was visible from the correct angle. Which was the angle of a person sitting in the lobby chairs, which no one had thought to consider. The button was not connected to anything. Daniel could tell because the cable that ran behind the desk had a gentle bow in it, an unsupported stretch of about 7 inches. Which meant the bracket that anchored it to the wall had been removed, for a desk renovation, possibly, or a move, and not replaced. A button that aesthetic rather than functional, a comfort prop. He wrote that down. He wrote the timestamp, 9:14 a.m. He wrote the approximate date the disconnection had likely occurred, sometime in the past 8 months, based on the undisturbed dust on the cable housing. Then he stood and walked to the elevator bank. The access card reader on elevator 3 had a lag of 1.3 seconds between card presentation and door release. He counted it 4 times with the second hand of his watch. The standard response time for that model, a Castle KX9, was 0.4 to 0.6 seconds. A 1.3-second lag indicated one of 3 things: a firmware update running in the background, a reader that was being polled by a secondary system at a frequency it wasn't designed for, or a reader that had been physically opened and reclosed within the past 30 days, leaving the internal antenna slightly misaligned. He looked at the bottom left corner of the reader housing. A hairline scratch in the paint, curved, consistent with a flathead screwdriver used by someone who knew what they were doing but was working quickly. He wrote elevator 3 reader accessed recently unknown purpose. Cross-check maintenance logs, priority, high. He did not go to the east stairwell. He had already documented that in the conference room. He moved instead to the 23rd floor. The server room door required a separate credential. A laminated sign read, Authorized Personnel Biometric Plus Card. The biometric reader was a fingerprint unit from a manufacturer that had issued a recall notice in 2021 for a specific firmware version that allowed replay attacks using stored thermal impressions. The recall had been widely ignored by facilities that had paid for installation and did not want a budget for replacement. The model number was visible on the lower right corner of the unit, FP770C, that was the recalled firmware version. Daniel photographed the plate with his phone. He did not try to enter the room. He stood there for 12 seconds, breathing quietly, and then he went back downstairs. At 10:52 a.m., Arnault called all 8 candidates back to the conference room. He collected their notes. Most had found between 4 and 7 vulnerabilities. The candidate from a firm called Stratcor had found 9, which Arnault acknowledged with a nod. Daniel's report was 6 pages, handwritten in a precise small print. It contained 23 distinct findings, each with a timestamp, a location code, a severity rating from 1 to 5, and a recommended remediation timeline. The 23rd finding was 3 sentences long. The server room biometric unit, FP770C, is subject to an unpatched firmware recall. This is the mechanism of the March breach. The individual who accessed the room in March used a stored thermal impression to defeat the reader. This requires an insider to collect the impression. The insider is still on staff. Arnault read it twice. He did not look up. That evening, Daniel picked Mara up from the after-school program at 5:45. She came out holding a drawing she'd made of a horse, which had 6 legs because she explained she'd run out of room and had to add 2 more at the bottom. That's good thinking, Daniel said. They drove home. She ate pasta with butter. He ate standing at the counter because she liked it when he stood where she could see him while she told him things, and she had a lot of things to tell him. The 6-legged horse. A boy in her class who claimed he could hold his breath for 5 minutes. The fact that Humphrey had been sitting in her backpack all day, and she was worried he had been lonely. Was he lonely? Daniel asked. Mara considered this. His eye can't see so good, so he probably didn't notice it was dark. Later, after her bath, after 2 pages of a book about a girl who discovers a secret door in her grandmother's garden. After the lamp went off and the small star-shaped nightlight went on, she said, from inside the dark. "Daddy, what did you do today? I went to a building and looked at it." "What were you looking for?" "Things that were wrong." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you find them?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said, and she was asleep in 4 minutes, Humphrey tucked under her chin. He sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold. His neighbor, Mrs. Adiola, had left a container of stew on the porch the previous evening. She did this once a week without discussing it, and he ate some of it now, cold, standing at the counter again. His phone showed a missed call from Ortega. He called back. "They're going to offer you the contract," Ortega said. "Arnault doesn't want me," Daniel said. "No, but Falk does. That's not a comfortable position." There was a pause, then, "You were in the building when it happened." "The March thing." Daniel said nothing. "I know you were," Ortega said. "Not as a candidate. You were working the garage across the street. You saw whoever it was go in." Daniel set his cup in the sink. "I didn't see enough," he said, "but you saw something." He turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment. "Enough to know it wasn't random," he said. The contract offer came through a law firm, as Ortega had said it would. The terms were standard. A 6-week assessment engagement, deliverables due every 2 weeks, a non-disclosure clause with teeth. Daniel signed it at the kitchen table, while Mara watched cartoons in the other room. He started on a Monday. He was given an office on the 19th floor, a guest badge that gave him access to most of the building, and a cold welcome from every member of Arnault's team, who had been briefed on his hire the way people are briefed on things they consider an insult. He didn't need them to like him. He needed the maintenance logs. It took him 3 days to get them, through a facilities coordinator named Priya, who was new enough to the company that she hadn't yet learned which requests she was supposed to quietly redirect. The logs covered the 18 months prior to the March breach. He read them over 2 evenings, cross-referencing them against the access card records that Halcott had, with visible reluctance, provided as part of his contractual scope. On the night of the March breach, the maintenance log showed a routine service call to the 23rd floor HVAC system between 7:15 and 9:30 p.m. The service technician was logged under the name of a company called Meridian Climate Systems. The access card record showed the credential belonging to that technician was used twice, once to access the 23rd floor corridor and once, 11 minutes later, to access the server room. But the server room was not on the technician's work order. There was no reason for an HVAC technician to enter a server room. Daniel cross-checked Meridian Climate Systems against Vantara's vendor registry. The company existed. It had been a contracted vendor since 2018. But the individual technician, badge number CV1147, appeared in the system under a name that, when Daniel searched it against the state contractor licensing database, returned no results. The name was a ghost. The badge number had been issued from within Vantara's own credentialing system by an administrator account at 6:43 p.m. on the night of the breach. The administrator account belonged to a man named Kevin Strell. He was Arnault's deputy for systems and access. He had been with Vantara for 6 years. He coached youth soccer on weekends and had a photograph of his family on his desk in which everyone appeared to be laughing at something just off frame. Daniel did not go to Arnault. He did not go to Falk's office. He wrote a memo, 2 pages, and he sealed it in an envelope, and he drove it to Ortega's house at 8 in the evening and handed it to him at the door. "If I stop responding to calls," Daniel said, "open it." "You think it goes higher than Strell," Ortega said. "I think Strell isn't smart enough to build this alone." That part came 3 days later, in the form of an anonymous message sent to Daniel's work email from a temporary address that had been created that morning and would be deleted by noon. The message contained a single attachment, a scanned document, a consulting agreement dated 8 months before the March breach. It was between a shell company registered in Delaware and a private technology firm that held a competing patent to the data architecture company. Vantara had recently valued at $600 million. The party signing on behalf of the shell company was Brett Arnault. The surface motive had been data theft, industrial espionage on behalf of a competitor who wanted the patent files that lived on that server. But the deeper motive was the one that anonymous messages never say out loud. The 600 million valuation was going to generate a board-level acquisition conversation within the year. If that acquisition went through, Arnault's role would be eliminated in the restructuring. He had known this since a closed board meeting he should not have had access to. He had known it before anyone else on his team did. Strel had not recruited Arnault. Arnault had recruited Strel. Daniel sat with this for a full day. He did not act quickly. He built the record carefully. Printouts, screenshots, the maintenance log with its annotations, the vendor registry with its gaps, the consulting agreement with its stamp. He organized it in a manila folder with a handwritten index on the inside cover. He drove it again to Ortega's house, and this time he added a cover letter that addressed Richard Falk by name. "Don't send this," Daniel said. "Unless I tell you to, or unless you can't reach me by Thursday morning." It was Tuesday evening. On Wednesday morning, Daniel arrived at the building at 7:45. He had told no one he was coming early. He went to the 19th floor and found that his guest badge no longer worked on his office door. It had been deactivated overnight. He stood in the corridor and thought for 4 seconds. Then he walked to the stairwell. Strel was in the server room on 23. Daniel had not known this, but Arnault had needed someone to move something before the day started. Before whatever they had planned for Daniel's contract termination could happen with lawyers present, and Strel was the one who moved things. Daniel took the stairs. He came out on 23. He walked to the server room. The door was open. Strel was inside at a rack-mounted terminal wearing a visitor badge. His own badge would have generated a timestamp. He had borrowed the identity of someone who was not in the building yet. Daniel said, "Step back from the terminal." Strel turned. He was a compact man, calm by habit and frightened by situation. "You shouldn't be up here," he said. "Neither should you," Daniel said. Strel reached for the keyboard. Daniel crossed the room in 3 steps. He did not grab Strel. He placed his right hand flat on the terminal screen and powered it off at the hardware level. Strel's hand was still in the air. "Don't," Daniel said. It was the shortest sentence in the building that morning. Strel stood. He was calculating something, the way people calculate when they are deciding between 2 bad options. Daniel could see the calculation ending. He stepped back, giving Strel a clear path to the door. Strel walked out. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He got in. The door closed. Daniel had already sent a text to Ortega, "Send it." He photographed the terminal in its powered-off state. He photographed the borrowed visitor badge that Strel had left on the rack. He photographed the timestamp on his phone. He sat down on the floor of the server room with his back against a cool metal cabinet, and he waited. Falk arrived on 23 at 9:15. He had come alone, which was unusual for him, which meant Ortega had reached him directly, which meant Ortega had a cell number for a reason Daniel had never asked about. He read the contents of the manila folder standing up. He read it without expression. He looked at the photograph of the consulting agreement for a long time. Then he looked at Daniel on the floor. "Arnault is downstairs," Falk said. "I know," Daniel said. "He'll have lawyers in an hour." "Probably less," Daniel said. Falk closed the folder. He held it. He looked at the powered-off terminal with the expression of a man who was revising a very long list. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Daniel looked at him. "Because you hired Arnault," he said. Arnault resigned that afternoon. The language in the statement the law firm issued was careful and bloodless, pursuing other opportunities, and said nothing about the consulting agreement, which had been quietly transmitted to 3 members of the board and would be discussed in a meeting Daniel was not invited to and did not want to attend. Strel was placed on administrative leave by end of day. There would be further proceedings. Daniel did not follow them closely. He was offered the full-time contract. He accepted a modified version of it, a rolling monthly engagement, no exclusivity clause, the right to terminate with 2 weeks' notice. He asked for a small office on the 19th floor. He asked that his name not appear in any company directory. The facilities team repaired the elevator reader within 48 hours of receiving his remediation list. The biometric unit on 23 was replaced with a model not subject to any active recall notice. A new credentialing protocol was issued requiring dual administrator approval for all after-hours badge issuances. The panic button in the lobby was reconnected. These changes had no ceremony. They appeared in a facility's update memo that went to 12 people, none of whom were Daniel Voss. On Thursday evening, he picked Mara up from school. She had made another drawing, this time of a house with a very large chimney and a small family standing outside it. She pointed to the smallest figure. "That's Humphrey," she said. "Why is Humphrey outside?" Daniel asked. "He wanted to see the yard," she said. They drove home through the late afternoon light. She fell asleep in the backseat before they reached the expressway. Her cheek against the window, Humphrey folded under her arm. He pulled into the driveway and turned the engine off but did not get out. The street was quiet. A dog barked once, somewhere on the next block, and then didn't. Mara's breath fogged the window in small, regular clouds. He sat there for a while, hands still on the wheel. He had told Ortega once what he had seen from the parking garage across the street. Not a face, not enough for a description, just a shape in a doorway. The specific way a person stands when they are doing something they expect to go unnoticed, and something in that posture that had told him. With the certainty that 12 years of doing exactly that kind of work produces. Had this had been planned from inside, he had been right, he was almost always right. He had spent years being right in rooms that no one would ever hear about, for people whose names were in no directory. And then Claire had gotten sick, and then she had died, and none of that rightness had mattered in the way that it needed to matter, which was entirely and at once and before it was too late. He got out of the car. He carried Mara inside without waking her. He settled her on the couch with Humphrey and a blanket and went to the kitchen to start dinner. The light above the stove was the only one he turned on. Through the window, the sky was going dark in that slow, gradual way that made it seem, if you watched it long enough, almost like a deliberate thing. He turned back to the stove. The window went dark behind him,